Welcome to Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we will continue with the epic tale of the Argonauts. Beginning with the chapter, the Argonauts are pursued and escape with Medea. In the meantime, Aeetes and all the Colchians had learned of Medea's infatuation, of her actions and of her flight. They met in the marketplace, fully armed, and soon after marched to the riverbank with a rattling of arms that sounded as thunder. Aeetes rode in a well-joined chariot drawn by the horses the sun god had given him. In his left hand he carried a round shield, in his right hand a long pitched torch. At his side leaned his tall and heavy lance. His son, Absyrtus, held the reins. But when they reached the mouth of the river, the ship, driven on by its tireless rowers, had already gained the open sea. Torch and shield dropped from the king's fingers. He raised his hands to heaven, and he called on Zeus and Apollo to witness the wrongdoing that had been done to him, and suddenly declared to his subjects that unless they seized his daughter on land or in sea and brought her to him, so that he could revenge himself to his heart's desire, they should all lose their heads. This terrified Colchians put out to sea that every day hoisted sail and sped in pursuit of Medea. Their fleet, under the command of Absyrtus, the son of Aeetes, looked like an endless flock of birds which darkened the sky as they trailed over the waters. A favorable wind bellied out the sails of the Argonauts, and on the morning of the third day they entered the river Halys and moored their ship to the shore of Paphlagonia. Here, at Medea's request, they made offerings to the goddess Hecate, who had saved them. Then their leaders and some of the others as well remembered that Phineus, the aged prophet, had bidden them return by another route. None of them knew these regions, but Argus, son of Phrixus, came to the rescue, for from the writings of the priests he had learned that they were to steer to the river Ister, which rises from the springs in the Riphean mountains and divides into many branches, so that the wealth of its water pours into both the Ionian and the Sicilian Sea. When Argus had advised them thus, the sky was suddenly cleft by a broad rainbow in the quarter toward which they were supposed to sail. A fair wind blew, and the sign in the heavens shone on until they were safe in that mouth of the river Ister, which empties into the Ionian Sea. But the Colchians had not ceased in their pursuit, and since they had lighter ships and could sail more swiftly, they arrived at the mouth of the Ister before the Argonauts and scattered among the various bays and islands. There they lay in wait for the heroes and blocked their passage to the sea after they had cast anchor in the delta of the river. The Argonauts, who were armed with great numbers of the enemies, went ashore, and it occupied one of the islands. The Colchians followed them, and it seemed that battle must ensue. Then the harried Greeks began to negotiate, and both sides finally agreed that the Argonauts were, at all the events, to carry off the golden fleece, which the king had promised Jason for his labors. But Medea, the king's daughter, was to be left on another island in the temple of Artemis, until a neighboring king, noted for his justice, should decide whether she was to return to her father or follow the heroes to Greece. When the girl heard this, she grew frantic with fear, took her beloved aside to a place where his companions could not hear her, and pleaded with him tearfully, "Jason, what are you going to do with me? Has your good fortune made you forgetful of everything you solemnly swore to me when you were in terrible need? How thoughtless I was to stake my hopes upon you, hold my cheap honor, and leave my fatherland, my house, my parents, and all that I loved best. It is because of you, of what I did for that I am now borne far from the open sea. My foolhardiness got you the golden fleece. For you, I yielded up my maidenhood, and am following you to Greece as your wife. But now, because of all this, you must protect me. Do not leave me here alone, nor let kings pronounce judgment upon me. If I am allotted to my father, I am lost. And how could you then rejoice in your return? How could Hera, the wife of Zeus, whom you boast as your protector, approve such a course? If you abandon me, the time will come when, deep in disaster, you will think of Medea, when the golden fleece will slip from you like a dream. Then vengeful spirits shall drive you from your native land, just as I, through your trickery, was driven from mine. So she spoke, maddened with passion, and would gladly have set fire to the ship, burned up everything, and cast herself into the flames. Jason looked at her and grew uncertain. Her conscience smote him, and he said propitiatly, "Compose yourself. It was not serious in closing this agreement. It is only for your sake that we are trying to delay the battle, because our foes are thick as locusts in summer. All who live here are friends of the Colchosians, and would help your brother Absyrtus capture you and take you back to your father. Besides, if we fought now, we should all perish miserably, and your lot would still be more hopeless, for with us dead, you would still fall prey to the foe. This agreement, I tell you, is only a rose through which we hope to destroy Absyrtus, and once their leader is no more, the neighbors of the Colchosians will not wish to give him aid." And now Medea gave him grim counsel. "I have strayed from my duties once," she said, "blinded by emotion, and I have done an evil thing. I cannot go back, and so I must go forward in crime. I will coax my brother until he gives himself into your hands. Have a lavish banquet prepared for him. I shall try to induce the heralds to leave him alone with you, and then you can kill him, and vanquish the leaderless Colchosians." So these two planned to trap Absyrtus. They sent him many gifts, including a sumptuous robe, which the queen of Lemos had given to Jason. The Graces had woven it for Dionysus with their own hands, and in the fine mesh of the purple stuff clung the perfumes of heaven for the god himself. Drowsy with nectar had slumbered in its folds. Medea slyly urged the heralds to bring Absyrtus to the other island, to the temple of Artemis, at the dead of night, and pretended that she would devise a way for him to seize the golden fleece and take it back to King Aeetes. Had thus deceived these messengers of peace, she sprinkled the wind with so much of her magic brew that the scent would have been enough to lure the wildest beast from the highest mountain. And what she hoped for took place. At midnight, Absyrtus, deceived by solemn pledges, rode to the holy island. Alone with his sister, he tried to probe her guileful mind and discover whether she was indeed setting a snare for the strangers. But it was as if a boy were trying to wade a swollen mountain stream, with a grown man cannot cross unimperiled. For when they were deep in talk, and his sister seemed ready to do all he asked, Jason suddenly rushed out of the ambush, brandishing his naked sword, and the girl turned away and hid her eyes in her veil, so that she might not see her brother Absyrtus killed. Like a victim at the altar, the king's son fell under the blow of Jason's blade, and Medea's gown was splashed with the blood of her brother. But the goddess of vengeance, from whom nothing is hidden, looked forth from her secret dwelling with angry eyes, and beheld the terrible deed committed here. After Jason had cleansed himself of the blood and buried the body, Medea signaled to the Argonauts with a torch, for so it had been agreed. These drew up their ships beside the vessel in which Absyrtus had come to the island of Artemis, and fell on his leaderless companions like hawks on flocks of doves, or lions on sheep. Not a single man escaped death. Jason, who came to aid his friend, was not needed. The battle had already been decided. The Argonauts on their homeward journey. On the advice of Peleus, the heroes left the mouth of the river and sped speedily away before the remaining Colchians had realized what had happened. When they saw what had been done, they set out to pursue their foes, but Hera deterred them by kindling a flash of lightning in the sky. They feared her warning, and since they also feared the anger of their king if they returned without either their daughter or his son, they remained on the Isles of Artemis in the mouth of the river and settled down. But the Argonauts continued on their way and passed many coasts and islands, among them that on which Queen Calypso, the daughter of Atlas, had her dwelling place. Already they thought they discerned the tallest peaks of their homeland rising in the distance, when Hera, fearing the plots of Zeus, stirred up a mighty storm, which drove their ship into the inhospitable Amber Islands. And now the wood from the oak of Dodona, which Athene had set in the timbers of the prow, began to speak, and the listeners shook with dread. "You will not evade the wrath of Zeus, and you will wander over the sea," said the oak, "until Circe, the sorceress, purifies you of the cruel murder of Absyrtus. Let Castor and Polydeuces pray to the gods to point you the path which lead to Circe, the daughter of the sun god and Perse." So said the prow of the Argo at the hour of dusk. The heroes shuddered when they heard such misfortune foretold, and sat motionless at their oars. Only Castor and Polydeuces leaped from their bench and ventured to beg the immortal gods for their protection. But the ship dashed on the inner reaches of the Eridanus near Phaethon, burned by the chariot of the sun, had once fallen into the river. And even now from the bottom of the river his searing wounds still poured forth fire and smoke. There is no ship which can sail lightly across these waters, for the flames suck it into the midst. Along the shores, Phaethon's sisters, the Aeetes, were there changed into poplars, sigh in the wind, and the drip bright tears of amber on the earth, which the sun dries and the river draws into its tides. Thanks to their stout ship, the Argonauts overcame this peril, but they lost all desire for food or drink. By day, they were harassed by the intolerable stench of scorching flesh. By night, they heard the Aeetes lament, their gold-colored tears oozing into the sea like drops of rich oil. They rowed along the shores of Eridanus and came to the mouth of the Rhodanus, and would have entered there and met their death, had not Hera suddenly appeared on a crag and warned them away with her clear, ringing, divine voice. She shrouded the ship in black fogs, and so they journeyed for endless days and nights, and passed many places where Celtic families had settled, until they saw the Tyrrhenian Sea, and soon after rode safely into the harbor of Circe's islands. They found the sorceress on the shore, leaning over the sea and washing her face in the waves. She had dreamed that her entire house was running with blood, that a flame had devoured all the magic herbs and brews with which she used to bewitch strangers, and that she was cupping the blood in the hollow of her hand and trying to quench the fire. This nightmare had startled her from sleep at dawn and driven her to the shore. Here she washed her garments and her locks as though they were already steamed with the blood. Great beasts came after her in flocks as cattle following the shepherd from the stalls, and they were unlike any known animals, being formed of the limbs of one kind of creature and the head of another. The heroes stood aghast, for they had only to look at Circe to know that she was the sister of cruel Aeetes. When the goddess had cleansed herself of the terrors of the night, she turned homeward and called to the beast and stroked them as one fondles dogs. Jason had his entire crew remain aboard. Only he and Medea went ashore, and once on the beach, he drew the reluctant girl onto the palace of Circe. The sorceress did not know what the strangers had come to her for. She bade them to be seated in sumptuous chairs, but quietly and mournfully they sat down by the hearth. Medea bowed her head into her hands, and Jason thrust the sword with which he had murdered Absyrtus into the ground, and laid his palm upon it, and supported his chin on the hilt, without raising his eyes. Then Circe knew that which was before her were supplicants, and brought to her by the need for expiation and by the bitterness of exile. In honor of Zeus, the protector of suppliants, she made the necessary offerings by slaughtering a young pig whose mother was still alive and calling upon Zeus, who grants purification. Her servants, the naiads, were told to collect all the means of atonement that were in the house. She herself went to the hearth and burned sacrificial cakes, and praying all the while to pacify the Furies, and begged the gods to forgive those who had stained their hands with murder. When all was done, she was first seated the strangers in splendid chairs, and sat down opposite them. Then she asked them about their journey, from where they had come, and why they had landed on her island, and how it was they had begged her protection. She recalled her dreams with its stream of blood. Now, when Medea raised her head to reply and looked into her face, Circe was struck by the girl's eyes. For Medea, as well as she, was descended from the sun god, and all his descendants had eyes glinted with gold. When she noticed this, Circe asked the fugitives to speak in their native tongue and in the language used in Colchis. The girl began to tell her all that had happened between Aeetes and the hero. Quite truthfully, only to suppress the murder of her brother Absyrtus. But the sorceress knew even that which remained unspoken. She pitied her niece. Poor girl. You have fled from home, leaving a dishonored name behind, and you have committed a grave wrong. Surely your father will come to Greece to take vengeance upon you for the murder of his son. I shall do you no harm, for you are a suppliant and my kinswoman to boot. But you must leave with this stranger, whoever he may be, for I cannot commend either your plans or your shameful flight. At these words, the girl was filled with aching grief. She covered her head and with her veil, and she cried bitterly until Jason took her by the hand. With faltering steps, she followed him out of Circe's palace. But Hera took pity on those that she had chosen to protect. Down the many-colored path of the rainbow she sent Iris, her messenger, to summon Thetis, the goddess of the sea, and when she had come, she entrusted the ship and the heroes to her care. As soon as Jason and Medea were aboard, gentle winds began to blow. With lighter heart, the heroes weighed anchor and hoisted sail. The Argos sped on in a fresh breeze, and soon they saw a beautiful island, green and flower-laden, the habitation of the beguiling sirens who lure passers-by with their singing, but only to destroy them. Half bird and half maiden, they always lay in wait for new quarry, and no one who came near could escape them. Now, they sang their sweetest airs to the Argonauts, who were just about to cast their rope ashore and make fast the ship, when Orpheus, the singer from Thrace, rose in his seat and began to strike such rich and ringing chords on the strings of his divine lyre that he drowned out the voices, decoying his friends to death. At the same time, the gods sent a swift and sounding wind to the stern of the ship, so that the song of the sirens soon died away in the wake. Only one of the heroes, Boots, the son of Teleon, had been unable to resist the silvery strains. He sprang from his rowing bench, dived into the sea, and swam toward the enchanting sounds. And he would have perished had it not been for Aphrodite, who ruled over Mount Eryx in Sicily. She snatched him from the whirlpool and cast him ashore on a promontory of the island, where he lived from that time on. The Argonauts mourned him as one dead, and went on with more adventures. They came to a strait flanked on the other side of Sicily, and a steep rock which jutted out into the sea, and seemed as if it would dash the Argo to pieces. On the other, by Charybdis whirlpool, sucking the waters down and threatening to swallow the entire ship. The waters between these two were full of floating rocks torn from the depths. There, Aeetes had once had a smithy, but now only smoke rose through the water and darkened the air. As the heroes approached, suddenly from all sides, sea nymphs, the daughters of Nereus, came to meet them, and Thetis, their queen, put their own hand on the rudder. They all swam around the ship, and whenever it neared the floating rocks, one nymph flicked at another, like girls playing ball. Now it flew up to the clouds on the crest of a wave. Now it sank deep into its troughs. From the top of a crag, Hephaestus, his hammer swung over his shoulder, watched the game, and Hera, the wife of Zeus, saw it from the star-spangled stars and sky. But she clutched Athene's hand, for she could not look on without giddiness. At last they were safe from danger, and sailed on over the open sea until they came to the island of Phaeacians and their good king Alcinous. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.